The Last of Us is more than a story about a zombie apocalypse. It's a story about the choices we're willing to make when survival costs more than we're willing to pay. It's about love, loss, and what we become when we're forced to decide who lives and who dies. With the release of Season 2 of HBO's adaptation on the horizon, it's time to revisit one of the most controversial and emotionally charged questions in the entire franchise. Did Joel do the right thing? Would the Fireflies' cure have worked? And was the world robbed of salvation, or simply spared from another kind of tragedy? This video will contain full spoilers for The Last of Us Part 1, Part 2, and potentially the second season of HBO's adaptation, so if you are not caught up, consider this as your warning. Now, let's dive into the moral ruins of this world and the question that continues to divide fans over a decade later.
Okay.
The world of The Last of Us takes place 20 years after civilization has collapsed. All hell is broken loose. Raiders and thieves run rampant. Hunters and cannibals lurk in abandoned cities, waiting for prey to fall into their traps. And Fedra, the last remnant of the US military, rules over scattered quarantine zones with martial law, while survivors cling to what little safety they can find as the infection slowly seeps into every corner of the world. In this world, the old notions of right and wrong have eroded, and what replaces them is a brutal landscape where morality is dictated by survival, and hope is a luxury that few can afford. Among this chaos, the Fireflies, a rebel militia, stand out as one of the few remaining groups still clinging to the idea of salvation. Their motto,
"Remember when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light,"
reflects their vision of a better world, even if that light grows dimmer with each passing year. The Fireflies took fight to Fedra's quarantine zones, believing that their resistance would ignite the path to a better future. Where Fedra enforced order through curfews, executions, and authoritarian rule, the Fireflies championed through freedom, democracy, and a return to the civilian government. But over time, the rebellion became just as morally complex as the regime that they opposed. While their long-term goal was to develop a cure and restore the world, their short-term tactics included sabotage, bombings, and propaganda, strategies that endangered civilians just as much as Fedra's did. Their guiding slogan, "When you're lost in the darkness, look for the light," became a symbol of hope, but often that light was lit by fire and blood. The Fireflies operated with a utilitarian mindset. If peace and salvation required sacrifice, then so be it. And their faith in Ellie's immunity as the world's last hope only intensified their willingness to cross moral lines in the name of their salvation.
A vaccine.
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
One of the strongest messages in The Last of Us is that morality is not fixed. It's situational, personal, and often compromised. When Joel and Ellie drive through Pittsburgh and are ambushed by a man pretending to be injured, Joel immediately recognizes it as a trap, not just because he's clever, but because he's done the same thing before. He tells Ellie in the HBO series,
I've been on both sides.
revealing that in the past he's lured, killed, and looted other survivors as well. Ellie eliminates several people across the game, but her most pivotal and morally jarring act is when she kills David in the Winter chapter. She doesn't just stop him, she keeps going, driven by trauma, fear, and rage that show us that even the most innocent character is changed by violence. She's a child who had to become a killer to survive, a reminder that in this world the most unethical choice is sometimes the only option left. Joel's decision to kill the Fireflies doesn't just come out of nowhere, it's the culmination of 1,000 smaller compromises. He's not an outlier in this world, and Ellie, by the end, begins to reflect that too. Over the course of the game, we watch Ellie grow from cargo to companion, from someone being protected to someone who knows how to protect. She makes impossible choices, loses the people she loves, and kills to survive. She earns her place as an equal, but in the moment that mattered the most, the moment her entire journey had seemingly led to, Joel takes her voice away. He chooses for her, and then he lies to her.
Swear to me that everything that you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
But was Joel really the only one who made that decision for Ellie? Marlene tells him to do what is right, and to make the choice that Ellie would have wanted, but Ellie never got that choice. She was unconscious the entire time, and when she wakes in the car, she has absolutely no memory of the hospital, no idea what happened or what the cost of a cure would have been. Marlene speaks with certainty about Ellie's wishes, but Ellie didn't know the full truth. She didn't know the procedure would have killed her. So is it truly Joel who made the choice for Ellie, or is it Joel who saved Ellie from being forced forced into something she truly had no idea she was choosing. When it comes to Joel's decision, the most philosophical question is also the simplest. Do you sacrifice one to save many, or is that one life too valuable to risk on a possibility? It's the classic moral dilemma, like the infamous trolley problem. You're standing at a switch, one track leads to the deaths of 5 people, and the other to the death of 1. Flip the switch and that 1 dies, do nothing and the 5 are gone. On paper, it's a question of math, of the greater good, but The Last of Us twists this problem, because in Joel's case, the switch doesn't guarantee anything. Choosing to let Ellie die is like flipping the switch, not knowing if the tracks are even connected, not knowing if the train will actually change direction and save those 5 people. However, you're still killing 1 person, but not with the certainty that it will save the others. It's not 5 lives for 1, it's 1 life for a chance to save 5. And that 1 life isn't abstract. It isn't a stranger, it's Ellie, a child who he began to see as his own daughter, and suddenly the choice isn't so clear anymore. On the surface, giving up 1 life to save countless others seems like the obvious choice, if you could be certain that it would work. But what if that sacrifice leads to nothing? What if the hope was misplaced? The real complication is the uncertainty. If the cure was guaranteed and Ellie chose it for herself, then Joel's actions might make him the villain. But if the cure had no chance of succeeding, suddenly he's a savior.
We traveled across the entire country to bring me to the Fireflies. I had so many questions for them.
The truth is, we don't live in either of these absolutes. We live in the space between.
Why did you pull me out of there while I was still unconscious?
And that's why no one can be sure. It's what makes the choice so powerful and so impossible.
How do you know they were useless? Maybe if you just would have given them more time, they could have figured something out.
There was no cure.
This led to the idea that maybe there was another option. Could Joel have gotten Ellie out of that hospital without killing anyone? Could he have spared the surgeon, Jerry Anderson, Abby's father? Maybe. But when you look at the situation from all sides, that moment was always destined to end in blood. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a collision. In part 2, we come to know Jerry not just as a surgeon, but as a father.
Oh, wow. 1978. Don't have that one in my collection.
You can keep it.
We see his quiet compassion and his relationship with Abby, his unwavering belief that a cure could rebuild a broken world, not just for everyone, but for her. He wasn't just doing his job, he was fighting for a future where his daughter could live without fear, and when that future landed on his operating table, there was no scenario where he could simply let it go. That's how deep his conviction ran.
I won't let you take her. This is our future. Think of all the lives we'll save.
And on the other side of the glass, there's Joel, a man who crossed a ravaged country with Ellie, a man who slowly and painfully let himself feel love again after decades of burying it with Sarah. After the horrors they endured together, especially after David, Joel stopped seeing Ellie as cargo. He saw her as a daughter, and when he realized that he might lose her like he lost Sarah, something inside of him snapped. He wasn't gonna walk away from that operating table. He wasn't gonna walk away from her. So when those two men stood on opposite sides of a single life, the outcome was inevitable. And in that moment, Joel made his decision first.
What do you do? I saved her.
In The Last of Us Part 2, Joel's decision ripples outward. The Fireflies scatter, scrambling to pick up the pieces of a life that one man destroyed, and Abby, Jerry's daughter, becomes the personification of the cost of Joel's actions. Her story reframes the narrative entirely. No longer hero and villain, just people caught in the consequences of a moment. Abby believed in the cure because her father did, and he was one of the few people with the knowledge to carry out the science to engineer it.
You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
If it was me, I'd want you to do the surgery.
To her, Joel didn't just kill her dad, he killed humanity's last chance, and he killed humanity's last hope.
Even if we found her, or by some miracle found someone else that's immune, it'd make no difference. Because the only person who could develop a vaccine is dead.
The light that the Fireflies had searched so desperately for in the darkness had just flickered out, and Abby's quest for vengeance mirrors Ellie's own path later in the game. Part 2 explores how morality fractures under grief. It blurs the line between justice and revenge and between right and wrong. Ellie becomes what she once feared. Abby becomes what she once hated. A mirror reflection of one another, both simply daughters fighting to avenge their fathers. And in the process, both confront the same question that Joel once did. What is one life truly worth? Although that question isn't as simple to answer as it may seem, there is another question that must be answered first, in order to truly understand. Would the cure have worked? In the HBO series, Marlene explains the doctor's theory.
He thinks that the cordyceps in Ellie has grown with her since birth.
Why is she in surgery?
It produces a kind of chemical messenger. It makes normal cordyceps think that she's cordyceps. It's why she's immune.
She explains that the cordyceps in Ellie's brain has mutated with her from birth, producing a chemical messenger that makes her immune. The hope was that by removing the infection, they could reverse engineer a vaccine using that chemical. But while Marlene speaks with conviction, there's no actual certainty, just scientific speculation. No proof that the chemical even exists, no deep testing, no confirmed process. Even if Jerry did create something, it would have taken months, maybe years, of research, experimentation, and trials. Ellie's mutation could be unique to her genetics, and the fungus in her body may not behave the same way that it would in others. There were no long-term studies, no understanding of how the infection might evolve, or if it could even survive outside of her body.
The cause of her immunity is uncertain. We must find a way to replicate this state under laboratory conditions. We're about to hit a milestone in human history equal to the discovery of penicillin. All of our sacrifices and the hundreds of men and women who've bled for this cause, or worse, will not be in vain.
The Fireflies were acting on hope, not evidence, and they were working on a very fragile theory, and yet Jerry was prepared to sacrifice the only known immune person based on that hope and optimism alone.
Look, everything that we've been fighting for, all the sacrifices, all of the horrific, all of that is justified with this one act.
His choice wasn't just desperate, it was dangerously reckless. After more than 20 years of searching for a cure, killing Ellie may have just been another desperate gamble, one that likely would have failed like all the rest. And even if it had worked, what would it have changed? The infected vastly outnumber the living, and many, like the clickers, are already far too gone for any cure to help. Ellie's immunity doesn't make her invincible. Throughout her journey, she nearly died multiple times from violence, raiders, and other infected. Cordyceps consumes the host, flesh, blood, and brain until there's nothing human left. Not to mention, the world of The Last of Us is fractured. Cities are in ruins, highways are collapsed, and most of the remaining infrastructure is controlled by hostile factions, raiders, or infected zones. The Fireflies were a scattered, dwindling militia with limited resources, constantly under threat from Fedra and other rival groups. How would they have manufactured the cure at scale, preserved it, and safely delivered it across such a hostile landscape? Who was to determine which survivors were even worthy of receiving the cure? The logistics alone make the widespread distribution nearly impossible. A cure doesn't need to just exist, it needs a functioning world to support it, and that world is already gone. At the end of all this, if you're still asking who was right, maybe that's the whole point. We aren't supposed to know, and this question isn't one that deserves an answer. Neil Druckmann has no intention of ever giving us one, but it still raises a debate, a question that's intended to make you think, something that is intended to make you put yourself into the world and determine what your decision would have been. What choice would you have made? Was the life of one worth the possibility of thousands? Or was the risk too great to justify only a scientific speculation?